Do you remember the Indo-Pacific? I won't blame you if you don't. It was all the rage before last year, but then Russia invaded Ukraine and suddenly all the attention is back on Europe. But that does not mean the Indo-Pacific is doing any better. The Chinese threat is still there. Maritime incursions, unnecessary military drills, it's all happening in the shadow of Ukraine. But that's the thing about geopolitics. You cannot afford to be distracted or myopic. You must be ready to multitask. The question is Joe Biden up to that challenge? Well, his schedule certainly says he is. The US president hosted the South Korean president last week. This week, he's hosting the president of the Philippines. And later this month, he's hitting the road. Papua New Guinea first and Australia after that. All these trips and summits are focused on one region, the Indo-Pacific. Let's begin with the ongoing one. The president of the Philippines landed in Washington on Sunday. This man, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., a.k.a. Bong Bong Marcos, that's what he's called. He'll be meeting Joe Biden later today. It promises to be a tough balancing act for him. On the one hand, Marcos wants to deepen his ties with the US, forge an even stronger relationship, he says. Those were his words. At the same time, he's keen to be on China's good books. He has promised a quote-unquote golden age in relations with China. So it'll be a balancing act. And for Joe Biden, this meeting is already a concession. Let me tell you why. Senator Biden was a critic of Marcos Sr. This was back in the 70s and 80s. Marcos was a dictator. He ruled the Philippines for 20 years. Now his son is in power and President Biden is courting him. The same son who has lawsuits pending against him in US courts. He is being welcomed by the US president. So much for putting principles first. Looks like Biden has suddenly discovered political pragmatism. Either way, today's talks will heavily feature defense. The US has access to 9 military bases in the Philippines. The assumption is they will be key in the defense of Taiwan. Now, Marcos has tried to play it safe so far. He granted America access to more bases. At the same time, he stopped them from storing lethal weapons. Sort of like a half measure. Biden will be hoping to bring the Philippines firmly into his corner. His job is to reaffirm US commitment on two things. One is mutual defense. The second is financial assistance and development. So that's Joe Biden's agenda this week, getting the Philippines on board. Later this month, he'll be traveling to Papua New Guinea, the first American president to travel there in more than a century. And that should tell you something about the neglect. In Papua New Guinea, Biden will attend the Pacific Islands Forum. 18 leaders of the Pacific Islands will be present. So will the leaders of Australia and New Zealand. Interestingly, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi will also be in the country. He too will meet the Pacific leaders. And that should tell you how much attention this region is now getting. In fact, Joe Biden's Pacific pivot started last year. He hosted Pacific leaders at the White House. He also pledged aid and dispatched Vice President Kamala Harris on a tour. Now he himself is on the job. The question is, will it be enough? Because the US has long ignored these islands in the Pacific. It had unmatched military power in the region, so nothing else mattered. Not financial aid, not infrastructure projects, not climate change investments. But China was playing the long game here. China is now the biggest bilateral lender in the region, much bigger than America and Australia. It has funded more than 100 projects. I'm talking about roads, airstrips, ports, strategic assets with civilian and military uses. China has an investment in all of them. And last year, it pushed for even greater influence. China pitched a security pact with 10 Pacific nations. It was a sweeping proposal. Reports say it would have given China military bases in the region, even allowed them to deploy troops. Thankfully, the Pacific nations rejected it. And that rejection should give Biden some hope. But if he wants to recruit Pacific Islands against Beijing, he must do two things. A, put his money where his mouth is. The Pacific Islands need help to fight against climate change. It's an existential threat for them. They need millions of dollars in investment to tackle it. And secondly, Biden needs to build a broad coalition. The US alone cannot convince the islands, but a broader alliance of democracies can. Which is why Prime Minister Modi's presence could be a game changer here. The Pacific Islands have already been let down by the US, Australia and New Zealand, but India is different. India is a member of the Global South, and it's now on the high table. India's lessons and skills could be key for the Pacific region. In return, New Delhi will also get some valuable diplomatic support, because don't forget, every vote counts at the UN. And the Pacific Forum alone has 18 votes. All these meetings and trips will conclude at the Opera House in Sydney. That's where the Quad leaders are meeting. It's not going to be an easy mission for Joe Biden. You can't neglect countries for decades and expect them to support you later. Biden's test will be convincing Pacific leaders about his campaign slogan in 2020, that America is back. So that's what Britain is up to, or at least some Britons. They're counting down to the farce of the century, a coronation in 2023. If you thought that was problematic, listen to the details. Apparently, there is an oath of allegiance to King Charles. The church has asked all Britons to take the oath. Correction there, not all Britons, all subjects, which means Canadians must take the oath. So must Australians. And don't forget the island dwellers in the Caribbean. They too must swear allegiance to a man who lives in a castle thousands of kilometers away. I get what you're thinking. Surely the church does not mean it. It's just part of the long-standing coronation traditions. Well, get ready to be surprised, because UK ministers are raring to go. They can't wait to take the oath of allegiance. Transport Secretary Mark Harper is one of them. He thinks it's a fantastic opportunity. The Labour Party thinks it's a lovely idea to involve the people, their words, not mine, but a fantastic opportunity for what exactly? To be tone deaf? To insult the concept of human equality, or to forget that you're living in a democracy? There is only one place for an oath of allegiance, and that is the history books. I know it's part of the royal traditions, but that does not make it right. If anything, it tells you why the whole institution is problematic, and the monarchy realizes this. They're trying hard to make the coronation fit for 2023. For example, it will feature women members of the clergy for the first time. It will also feature leaders from other faiths, namely Jewish, Hindu, Muslim, and Sikh. They will all present Charles with coronation symbols. We say full marks for trying, but the truth is you cannot disguise a dinosaur. You can add layers of clothing. You can call it by different names, but none of it changes the reality, and that's what the monarchy is, a dinosaur. Let me tell you why. For all this multi-faith display, the ceremony itself is deeply Christian. King Charles won't promise to defend secularism. He will be promising to defend the Protestant Reformed religion, aka Christianity. You see the problem here? Britain is a secular country, but the symbolic head of its government is a protector of just one religion. His appointment is based on one religion. Which brings us to another interesting episode of the coronation. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has a key role to play. He's got some reading to do. Rishi Sunak must read from the biblical book of Colossians during the coronation. Now remember, Sunak is a practicing Hindu. He took his oath of office on the Bhagavad Gita. But on Friday, he must read out from a biblical book. Is that a problem? Well, ideally, it's not. Reading other religious books will do you no harm. In fact, it may enrich your own ideas about religion. Having said that, this is not some leisure reading. This is an official obligation for a non-Christian prime minister. How is that okay in secular Britain? All these controversies bring us back to the same point. You simply cannot drag a coronation into 2023. Why? Because it runs contrary to everything that defines modern life. Children don't obey their parents nowadays. Are you really expecting them to pay allegiance to a 74-year-old king they haven't met? It's beyond bizarre. It's insulting to self-respecting citizens of Britain, and don't forget the former colonies. Allegiance to the king means something very different for them, sort of like reliving their trauma. So the royal family should stop wasting its time trying to modernize an outdated institution. There is nothing modern about golden carriages, looted jewels, and thrones. might as well revert to their 19th century strategy. We are entitled royals, just deal with it. Do you know of children with type 2 diabetes or high blood pressure or high cholesterol? Their numbers are much higher than you would imagine, and they're growing. Until a few years back, this was almost unheard of. Blood pressure, diabetes, and cholesterol were believed to be problems for middle-aged people. But now data shows that's no longer the case, especially in the UK. Cases of type 2 diabetes in children have jumped by 50% in the last 5 years. And a lot of this is linked to one problem: obesity. What's obesity? Abnormal or excessive fat accumulation in the body. It's a health risk. And in Britain, it's a national emergency. We're talking about child obesity in particular. It's a national emergency in the UK. Look at the numbers. There's a 50% jump in just 1 year. 1 in 7 children start primary school obese. 10% of 5-year-olds are obese in the UK. And in the case of 10-year-old children, more than 20% are obese. This poses a huge problem for the country, and they want to fix it. In fact, they've been trying to fix it for a while now, but nothing seemed to have worked. So Britain has come up with a new solution: a weight loss injection for children. They're selling it as a friendly neighborhood drug and calling it the skinny jab. It will be administered by the NHS, that's the National Health Service, England's publicly funded healthcare system. And this injection is not new. Earlier, it was approved for use by adults. Now it can be given to children too, those between 12 and 17 years of age. Is this the best way for children to fight obesity? Does the jab work? Well, a new study says it does. It was conducted over a period of 15 months. The subjects were 180 children aged 12 to 17. What the drug did was this: it suppressed their appetite. It reduced their body mass index by 16%, which may sound like a good result, but it's also a short-term result. And it's triggered a wider debate on children's health. Must we inject them with medicines to suppress their appetite? Turns out the UK is not the only country trying this. America is already using it. For children of the same age group, 12 to 17, they're using the same injection. They're calling it a game changer. Where does this leave time-tested strategies like exercising and following a balanced diet? Also, how big a challenge is obesity to start with? In our world today, more than 1 billion people are obese. Out of these, 340 million are adolescents and 39 million are children. Which are the worst hit places? Cook Islands, it's the worst hit, with 33% children suffering from obesity. In the US, this number is 23%. India, about 3%, according to data. Worldwide, these numbers are only increasing.
We also see that they're less active, physical activity has gone down, dietary habits have gotten worse.
So there's no denying that this is a major problem. But I come back to the question: are injections the best way to fix it? Is medication the only solution? Remember, this jab does not reset weight gain mechanisms. It only makes you want to eat lesser by suppressing your appetite. So it really does not address the root problems like genetics or lifestyle issues. And there's a clear lack of data. Also possible side effects like nausea, fatigue, heartburn, and a painful condition called acute pancreatitis. This drug could medicalize a whole generation, and that sounds scary. So even if it brings down the number of obese children, we have to ask, at what cost? And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. Starting with the US, a powerful tornado in Florida overturned cars and destroyed houses. Authorities are cleaning the debris and assessing the damage. In China, a wingsuiter successfully flew through the Tiananmen cave, becoming the first Chinese man to ever do so. In Venezuela, Russian gymnasts participated at the Alba Games under their flag. And finally, what makes May the 1st significant, apart from the fact that it's May Day? We're taking you back in history. On this day, Fidel Castro banned elections and declared Cuba a socialist country. The year was 1961. Castro was addressing hundreds of thousands of Cubans at a May Day parade. He identified himself as a Marxist and Leninist. This happened right after the US government made an attempt to overthrow Castro's government, but was unsuccessful. He was unapologetically anti-American. It established close ties with the Soviet Union. During his rule, Castro created a one-party government. He wanted to control all aspects of Cuba's politics and economy. We're leaving you with this. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Holy cow.
Oh my God, it's like right in front of, oh my
email exchanges from inside the BBC, they talk about the risk of violating Indian laws. It's easier to rake up the freedom of speech debate, but does it give anyone a free pass to knowingly violate the law? America supports India because it needs India's support in return. And India is working with the US because it suits India's interests. This is how geopolitics works. Last night, he diffused a crisis with his defense minister. But today, Netanyahu was confronted with a new problem. His cabinet seems to have rebelled against him. The UK is looking at the Indian subcontinent to fill its coffers. That India seems to be negotiating from a position of power, like a partner and not a former colony. The US and Russia are dangerously close to an armed conflict. This year, 2023, New Delhi will be the capital of global diplomacy. For a country as diverse as ours, with 88% of the population illiterate, it was a very big deal to write a constitution, and that too, the world's largest. Meanwhile, if we may, here's a Republic Day gift from India for the BBC. A list of suggestions for the BBC for their upcoming documentaries. Number 1, the Kohinoor and the colonial loot. Number 2, an outdated monarchy and unhealthy obsession with the royals. Number 3, racism in 2023. We're waiting.